A stadium. 40,000 seats, not for football. Not anymore. Men were walked onto that field, sentenced in under 10 minutes, and shot in front of a crowd that had no choice but to watch. That stadium is still standing in Kabul today, and the men who built that system, some of them are still in power right now. This is the real, documented history of how the Taliban turned killing into a public show, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why they're still doing it. Before we go further, hit subscribe, because the War Files doesn't sanitize history. We show you the record. All of it. Let's go. 1994. Kandahar. The Taliban capture the city after months of fighting. And the first thing they build isn't a hospital. It isn't a school. It's a court. 4 men. No lawyers. No appeals. No real defense. A suspect could be arrested in the morning and dead by nightfall. What mattered wasn't evidence. What mattered was how fast a verdict could prove who was really in control of the city now. The man running it is a judge named Malawi Said Mohammed. In early 1995, his court hands down Kandahar's first executions under Taliban rule. 2 men convicted of murder. And here's the part that should chill you. They weren't executed by police. They weren't executed by soldiers. They were executed by the families of their victims, in public, in front of a crowd forced to watch. The Taliban called this Kisa's retribution. Kill someone and the victim's family earns the legal right to kill you back. No state, no distance, just rage turned into law. There was no appeal process. There was no independent review. A grieving family became judge, jury, and executioner with the Taliban's blessing. It spread fast. In Wardak province, a former army officer from the old communist government is convicted of murder, executed with a sword by a dead man's relative in the district of Sheikhabad. In Lashkargah, the capital of Helmand province, watchdog groups like Amnesty International were already recording similar killings within months. City after city, the same pattern repeated. And the Taliban made sure the bodies weren't hidden away. They were left in public, sometimes for hours, so that everyone passing through knew exactly what had happened and exactly who had done it. And this was just the beginning. September 1996. Kabul is about to fall. Years of civil war have already gutted the city. When the Taliban finally reach the gates, there's almost no one left to stop them. Many of the defenders had already abandoned their posts or simply fled. They walk in, and the very first thing they do sends a message to the entire world. Former President Najibullah has been hiding for 4 years, not in a bunker, not across a border, but inside a United Nations compound, under UN protection, in the middle of Kabul. 4 years believing that international protection would be enough to keep him alive. The Taliban don't care whose flag is on the building. They go in. They drag him out along with his brother, General Shapar Ahmadzai. They shoot them both. Then they hang Najibullah's body from a traffic light post, in the center of the city for everyone to see. Think about what that means. UN protection meant nothing. The old Afghanistan was finished. And every official who'd once held power just got the message written in a corpse hanging over a city street. The Taliban offered a kind of amnesty to ordinary civilians and low-ranking officials who surrendered quietly. But for anyone who had led the old order, there would be no mercy at all. And then they take Ghazi Stadium, a place built for football, for Friday afternoons where a whole city cheered. The Taliban turn it into an execution ground, because a stadium already holds thousands of people. It's easy to secure, and it turns death into an event with a captive audience. In year 1 alone, thousands of Afghans are forced to attend or witness executions inside that stadium. Men accused of serious crimes were brought before the crowd, judged on the spot by Taliban religious judges known as ulama, and killed within minutes of the verdict. Sometimes several men in a single afternoon, but nothing prepared the country for what happened next. This is the part that shocked people even in a country already numb from 2 decades of war. A 40-year-old woman named Nurbibi, her stepson Turiali, 38, accused of adultery, no real trial. Taliban judges decide fast. The 2 are brought to a courtyard beside the Idgah Mosque, chosen deliberately because word had already spread and a crowd had already gathered. Nurbibi is placed in a pit dug into the ground. Then the stones start. Turiali dies first. Nurbibi is still alive after several minutes, so a Taliban fighter walks up and drops a large rock directly onto her head, in front of everyone, in front of a crowd that, under Taliban law, was almost entirely made up of men and children, because women weren't even allowed to speak in public, let alone stand in a crowd like this one. And here's the number that should stop you cold. Witnesses say this was at least the 3rd public stoning for adultery in the Kandahar region alone since the Taliban had taken the city just months earlier. Not the 1st, the 3rd, and it kept happening. Kabul, Herat, Kandahar, town after town, through 1999. Here's what makes it even darker. Real Islamic legal tradition requires multiple direct witnesses to even prove adultery, a standard so strict it's almost impossible to meet honestly. The Taliban threw that out entirely. Verdicts came from forced confessions, from a jealous neighbor's accusation, from a relative settling an old score. Justice and revenge became the same thing. And once that line disappears, a lie whispered by the wrong person can get you killed. Most of the documented stoning cases from this era targeted women specifically. Men were also executed for moral and criminal offenses, but under Taliban rule, women's movement and behavior were restricted so tightly that simply being seen with a man outside the family could become an accusation with a death sentence attached. One more fact, because it matters: Afghanistan's own official penal code, on the books since 1976, never authorized stoning as a punishment. This wasn't the enforcement of Afghan law. This was the Taliban replacing the law completely and calling it justice. If this is hitting you the way it hit me while researching it, drop a comment right now. One word: documented. Let me know you're still here, because it gets worse. Stonings and executions were only half the machine. U.S. government reports from 1998 and 1999 confirm it. Taliban courts routinely sentenced convicted thieves to amputation. A hand, sometimes a foot, in public. Trials lasting minutes with no real legal defense offered to the accused. Here's how broken the system really was. In one documented case, a man facing punishment simply bribed his way out. So Taliban officials grabbed someone else, arrested for a completely unrelated minor charge, and amputated his hand instead. It didn't matter who paid the price. It only mattered that someone did, in front of a crowd, as proof the system still worked. There was almost no medical care available afterward. Many of these people didn't die from the punishment itself. They died slowly, from infection or uncontrolled bleeding days later. A second death sentence hidden behind the first one everyone had watched. Alongside the amputations, public hangings became more common in rural districts, with bodies sometimes left hanging overnight as a warning to anyone passing by in the morning. And this was still just Kandahar, still just 1998. What happened next wasn't punishment anymore. It was massacre. August 8, 1998. Mazar-i-Sharif falls to the Taliban after months of brutal fighting with the Northern Alliance. What happens in the days after is one of the worst atrocities of the entire Afghan civil war. Taliban fighters move house to house, hunting specifically for men from the Hazara community, Shia Muslims, a group the Sunni Taliban had distrusted for years and blamed for a failed assault on the city the year before that killed a number of Taliban fighters. This wasn't chaos. This was organized. Door to door, men and boys dragged into the street and shot. Others hauled to detention sites and killed there instead, away from immediate view. Investigators later estimated at least 2,000 civilians, overwhelmingly Hazara men and boys, summarily executed within days of the city falling. It didn't stop at the city limits. Thousands more Hazara Uzbek and Tajik civilians were rounded up and crammed into shipping containers and cargo trucks for transport to other cities. No food, no water, no air. People suffocated. People died of heat, packed too tight to move. Their bodies were only discovered when the trucks finally reached their destination days later. The Taliban's newly installed governor Mullah Niazi stood in mosques across the city afterward and delivered speeches blaming the entire Hazara community for the deaths of Taliban fighters the year before, warning of more violence if they didn't comply or convert. 2 years later, near the Robadak Pass in Baghlan province, it happens again. A group of civilian detainees, mostly Ismaili Hazara, held for months before being killed by gunfire. Investigators found as many as 31 bodies at the execution site, proof that even detainees held for months with no formal charge could be summarily executed without warning or explanation. You'd think after 9/11, after the Taliban lost the entire country, this would be where the story ends. It's not even close. October 7, 2001, the Taliban refused to hand over Osama bin Laden. A US-led coalition invades. Within 2 months, Mazar-i-Sharif falls. Kabul falls with only light resistance as Taliban fighters withdraw south. Kandahar, the birthplace of the entire movement, falls by early December, and their leader, Mullah Mohammed Omar, goes into hiding rather than surrender. Ghazi Stadium reopens for sports and cultural events. Girls go back to school. Families return to routines suspended for years. But the Taliban don't disappear. They go underground and shift to insurgency. Without cities to control, they can't fill a stadium with witnesses anymore. So the method evolves. They start hunting individuals instead: government workers, police officers, teachers, local officials, translators, anyone cooperating with the new Afghan state or foreign forces. Roadside killings, village assassinations in quiet neighborhoods where the Taliban could still operate freely. Bodies were often left in public places deliberately, with notes pinned to them accusing the dead of spying, informing, or betrayal, meant to terrorize anyone else considering cooperation. Same message as always, just a new delivery system. Then the cameras arrive. By the mid-2000s, cheap digital video and mobile phones mean the Taliban don't need a stadium anymore. They have the entire internet as their audience. Cameras were pointed directly at bound captives. Videos were edited with graphics and titles, then shared online and through phones in rural areas, often showing victims forced into staged confessions before the killing. 2007, the beheading of a man named Ghulam Nabi, filmed and circulated widely. A child appears to carry out the killing while others stand around shouting. Human Rights Watch calls it a horrifying new low in the entire conflict, precisely because it involved a child filmed in plain view of everyone present. 2011, a video surfaces showing at least 16 captured Pakistani policemen, bound, lined up, and shot on camera by fighters identified with the Taliban, edited afterward and shared widely online as a message of strength to supporters. Between 2005 and 2010, the United Nations documents dozens of violent attacks on aid workers. In 2010 alone, at least 126 major incidents. The worst came in Badakhshan province, August 2010. 10 medical aid workers, 6 Americans, 2 Afghans, 1 Briton, 1 German, people who had come to provide eye care in remote villages, killed on their way home from that mission. The Taliban spokesman initially claimed responsibility, calling the team spies, though local commanders later denied it and called it murder instead. International agencies also documented the assassination of at least 21 students, teachers, and education staff in 2010 alone, often with no trial and no explanation beyond an insurgent's claim of betrayal. You'd think this couldn't come back, it did. And it came back fast. August 2021, Kabul falls again as Afghan government forces collapse and President Ashraf Ghani flees the country. Almost no resistance. The Taliban make a promise on camera to the entire world: general amnesty, restraint, a new Taliban. By the end of that same year, reports confirm more than 100 former Afghan security force members summarily executed or disappeared across provinces including Ghazni, Helmand, Kandahar, and Kunduz, the exact same provinces where this story started 30 years earlier. In the years since, executions, corporal punishment, and public displays of death have become increasingly common again. Not identical to the 1990s, but unmistakably built from the exact same blueprint. The stadium in Kabul is still standing. So is the system that once filled it. History doesn't repeat by accident. It repeats when the machine that made it possible, fear, spectacle, silence, never actually gets dismantled. It just gets switched off, stored away, and switched back on the moment nobody's watching anymore. If this history mattered to you, don't just scroll past it. Subscribe to the War Files right now. Comment which part of this you didn't know before today, and send this to one person who thinks this is ancient history. It isn't. Some of the men who built this system are still in power. Right now. Tonight. Every fact in this video comes from documented reporting, human rights investigations, and government records spanning nearly 30 years, from 1994 to today. Nothing here was exaggerated, because nothing needed to be. The real record is disturbing enough on its own. We'll see you in the next one. The War Files.